Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Danny Jenkins. I'm CEO and co-founder of ThreatLocker, and with us today we have Dr. Chase Cunningham, who's the author of Cyber Warfare, Truth, Tactics, and Strategies, as well as a bit of a cyber guru in government and lots of spaces that we may or may not be allowed to talk about. So I'll hand over to Chase to introduce himself.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. Like you said, wrote that book recently, written a few comic books for kids as well, retired military, do a bunch of work at Forrester currently.
Okay, I read this book both in paper now and on the Kindle. And of course, my favorite part of this book is the application whitelisting and ring fencing, which of course we're huge advocates of and we'll talk a little bit about today. But what made you, I mean, this is a great book, anyone, if you can get it on Amazon, and it really is a very easy read and very technical and no bullshit. Excuse my language.
That was exactly what I was going for, was easy read and no bullshit. So
yeah, it really talks about some of the real issues. But what made you put this together? Because
yeah, I mean, really, to the bullshit factor, right? Is I spend so much time reading through all this stuff that's on the internet and watching TV and whatnot, and I was constantly just underwater, realizing that no one was talking about the sort of historical perspective of where all this stuff started and where it's kind of going, and how the reality of that space is currently, and that was what I was really going for, was where did we come from, where are we going, and what should we actually think about in order to change the way that we do security.
One of the things that I found in this book was that I really did like was, I'm a security guru, and if anyone knows me, I'm one step away from tinfoil on my head. And now this quarantine has me in paradise because I don't have to leave the house. So it really is, it's my paradise. It's not paradise for people who don't have secure working from home systems, but I'm paradise. I'm in paradise in terms of I'm paranoid. I'm constantly concerned about people getting us and out to get us. And maybe that's because every single week, every single day, we have calls from potential clients and new clients who are coming through or in the process of being attacked and have had some kind of ransomware attack, or their servers are shut down, or their infrastructure shuts down, their factory shut down because some 400-pound guy sitting in Russia or Ukraine decided to access their servers one day and push out a piece of malware. So I've kind of seen a lot, so it makes me very, very paranoid. What I liked about this was I went through the book, and it has a lot of sections very much about tangible ways people are attacking you and what you should be doing. But it's not just responsive. It's very much on the defensive, because security is very much thought of as a responsive technique. And there are a lot of threat detection systems out there, and we can call them EDRs, threat hunting, threat detections, and they're all great systems that are used for detection breaches in your system. But if we're always playing catch up, if we're always trying to remediate or tackle today's threats, then we're never going to get ahead of this game. You can't chase the bad guy down once he gets in your house and try and remove him. It's easier to put a bolt on the front door and not let him in the first place. So one of the things I liked about this book is it talked a lot about strategies, and it talked a lot about, obviously, application whitelisting, segregation of controls, making sure that things can't get out to. And I want to pick a few points today and talk about a few areas on security that people probably aren't doing and probably should be doing, that they may seem as unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, I took the time to really write chapters on microsegmentation, application whitelisting, kill the password, kill the VPN, because when you look at the history, and I mean, I think a lot of people think that cybersecurity is this straight up new thing, like this is all brand new and we just discovered this in the last 10 years or whatever. No, we haven't. This is security practices, and if you follow where things came from and where they've evolved to, like, antivirus categorically has basically failed to stop the scourge of ransomware and those type of things. Like, it doesn't matter how sexy and amazing the ML thingy is that does detection or whatever. You look what malware needs to cause problems and ransomware needs to cause problems. It's got to propagate. So if I can isolate and I can segment, it has nowhere to go. And like you say, like I'm okay with an infection because, I mean, in the context of reality, if there's a grizzly bear running around outside of my house, that's a problem. If the grizzly bear is inside of a cage and he's outside of my house, still an issue, but not a real giant problem. Like I can walk around the cage and he's not just running through my yard. So it's the difference between focusing on what you can actually fix that will affect the adversary's tactics, rather than just trying to throw stuff at the problem and think you'll eventually get it right. What drives me nuts is when the people approach this with the hedge their bets side of the equation of, if I got $10,000 and I put $1,000 into 10 buckets, I'll probably get it right.
So one of the things that I see a lot, and I've seen a lot of cases where people have been breached, and people who have been breached prior to coming to Lock, and people who are still in monitor mode. And unfortunately, we're seeing 8 or 9 times multiple of known blocked malware in the last 2 months. So since this COVID situation, everyone's gone home. You know who hasn't gone home? The bad guys, because they sit in their basement and they work from home. So we've seen 8 or 9 times multiple of known blocked software on our environment. And in addition to that, we're probably seeing 12 to 13 times of blocks, which kind of terrifies you, because that means 50% of that is unknown blocks, because it didn't just start blocking today. But one of the things that I often see is when someone has been breached, and whether and we go back in and we look at how did this happen. They say, well, someone was sitting on my server. Someone had gone in through RDP or through my RMM system or through my Screen Connect system. And of course, we need to lock all these down. And when they're on the server, they're then going out and they're downloading, we're watching them download Mimikatz. I mean, we had a case a few weeks ago where someone had got in through an RMM, and they were downloading and trying to run malicious pieces of malware. And this was a threat locker client. They'd obviously had some kind of RMM or remote desktop session open. They were on the server and they were trying to run this bad software. And obviously, by using a default deny approach, it didn't matter that software wasn't on the blacklist or wasn't a known piece of malware, because it was being blocked out of the box, because everything gets blocked, which is great. But one concern that raised me: why is this guy able to browse the internet from a server? I mean, I sit there on Google and I browse the internet, and I go onto Amazon, and I go onto Netflix, and that's fine. I need to do that. Maybe I don't need to do it, but there's a value in that. But when I go on my servers, do I really need to browse the internet? And what's your thoughts on servers accessing the internet and what we can do to lock it down?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that is supposed to make sense, right? Is if you look at the technical requirements for these types of exploits to occur and to propagate and whatever, there's really no reason, like you're saying, a server should be browsing the internet. Like, that's an issue. And it's not one of those deals where I need IR and forensics and deep analytics and whatever else to figure out if this is a problem. If that thing shouldn't do that thing normally, that's something that should be denied unless there's an exclusion for it. You know, it's one of those things where it's way better to take the position of default deny and allow something to occur because there's a need for it, than to take a position of, yeah, let's let it go, and then if something's wrong, then we'll deny it. Like, that's just not going to work. You know, I've got 2 daughters that are getting ready to start dating, and my position with any boy they meet is default deny. Like, you know, no matter what, until they prove to me that they should be dating my daughter, it will be default deny. And it's the same sort of conceptual thing of, I don't think that that's a good idea until you can prove to me that it's okay. So we'll just say no to start with.
So you're under the position that the COVID-19 quarantine should stay until your daughters are 30 then?
I would be okay with that. Yeah, I would be all right with that.
So on that, everyone who's listening here, if you do have a server, and it doesn't matter if you're using ThreatLocker or not, you don't need to use ThreatLocker to block access to application access to the internet. You can block the servers going out to the internet. It's very easy. You go on your firewall, you put a deny rule in place. I get it's a pain in the backside. There's 2 big advantages to this. One is you're going to think twice before running something on your server, because I'm guilty of this too. If I need a browser on my server and I need to get something, and the easiest route for me to get it is to download Google Chrome and to then use Google Chrome to get it, I'm going to do that because I'm lazy like every other IT person. If I can't do that, I'm going to go through the proper channels, download it through a proper way, upload it through a proper channel, and it's going to enforce better change control on those environments. if Google Chrome can't run on your server, it can't be weaponized and used against you. So there's another advantage. If an application isn't on there, it can't be exploited, it can't be abused. Go back to 2017, where we saw ambulances being turned away from hospitals and power companies with outages over a piece of malware, and it was servers that got the WannaCry malware. It was servers that got hit hardest on that because they had RPC ports open because they were delivering file services and it was required. So when they got hit, all these servers got infected. If those servers didn't have access to the internet, it makes it much harder for them to do things. And of course, if you're using application whitelisting, it's not going to be able to run the application in the first place. But if it's not using Google Chrome, I mean, Google released an urgent patch, I think this week, on security. Internet Explorer last year released a patch that allowed attackers to run PowerShell commands directly from your computer. So if you can stop the application running and then stop it going to the internet, great. If you are using ThreatLocker, and for those of you who do use ThreatLocker, we make that really easy from not just a server level, because here's the other important part. And I'm going to show you a quick example of this actually. RegServe, one of the most deadly tools, RegServe and PowerShell and Run DLL, all of them the same. They're the most scary tools you run on your computers. So if you, if I can find my correct screen to share here. There you go. If you allow these applications to run, and here's my USB drive being blocked, those applications can potentially do a lot of damage. So when you do need to allow application access to the internet, or you do say, okay, this server needs to go to this website or this IP address, that's fine, but it doesn't mean you should also do it from every single application point of view, because just because Google Chrome can do it, or you can run Windows updates, it doesn't mean, I've got an example here of how RegServe can be used against you. I was trying to turn off all my security policies to do it. See if I can find this here. So I can literally run this, and it doesn't matter if you're using whitelisting or not. If I go into command prompt here, and I don't even think I have to be an administrator, so I can just literally run RegServe. RegServe has the ability to run fileless malware in protected memory from the internet. It's very difficult for an antivirus. It can look for threat patterns, it can look for suspicious behavior, and it can try and shut it down based on that. But if it doesn't fall into one of those categories, it's very difficult to say, oh, RegServe is doing something wrong. But here's another secret. I have never, in 18 months of doing ring fencing, seen a legitimate reason for RegServe to access the internet. And even PowerShell, there's very few reasons it needs to access it. So when it does, let it happen. So if I go into here now and I've just allowed that, we see I've just ran this command. It hasn't ran any software. We've got whitelisting on here, and it's gone and created that bad file on my desktop, which is just a text file. So it's not doing anything particularly bad. The point is I can run code. If I can create a text file on my desktop, I can do a lot worse than that. If I go in here and have a look at my audit here, which is now timed out, we can see, I'm trying to get the zoom window out of my way. We can see what happened on the internet. So if I go, I'm pretty sure this is, yeah, so if I go into here, I can see RegServe called, first it went out to the internet and it downloaded my payload, and then it called PowerShell. So there's a couple of things. One, RegServe does not need to go out to the internet. So just by enabling policies, and whether it's done at the firewall level or whether it's done at the application level with ThreatLocker, or even better, both, just by enabling a policy to say this application cannot go out to the internet, except maybe this trusted site, which should be none in the case of RegServe, you can stop that attack being launched. And then the same applies to PowerShell. PowerShell does not need to go onto the internet except certain sites. So just because you're allowing access to the internet, it doesn't mean everything should be allowed access to the internet. I can just literally go in and turn on these policies. They're all suggested policies out of the box. If you are using ThreatLocker, they're there by default and you have to turn them off now. And just by enabling that, if I wait long enough and try and run the same command, oh no, still ran. Give it a second to replicate. We'll see here in a moment that these come up as ring fenced. Actually, they blocked the first part of it apparently. So we can see here that PowerShell tried to go out to the internet and it tried to download this and it was denied. If we do the same thing, I think so if we got, maybe it's taken a bit of time for that RegServe one to kick in. essentially, just by turning these policies on, we can really harden our environment, and there really is no negative impact to the user. Another thing, talking about servers, and this is something that we're trying to encourage more and more, is servers shouldn't be changed that often. And when you're making changes to servers, you really should be conscious about what you're doing. You shouldn't need to elevate as an administrator. And we'll talk a little bit about who should and shouldn't be administrators, which is a pretty easy answer. But they shouldn't need to ever elevate. So one of the things you can do here, if you go into Threat Locker, you can actually block elevation. So you can just create a policy here to say, I'm going to block elevation consent. Of course, this is a desktop, but it doesn't really matter anyway. No reason not to block it on your desktops if you can. You can just literally say deny it. Now, what this means is, without going into Threat Locker and turning off this policy, whether it's temporarily or permanently, no one will be able to go onto this machine and elevate, which means if an attacker does get onto your machine, it's very hard for them to install anything that requires administrative credentials. So if we're blocking access to the internet, it's very hard for them to get their payload. If we're blocking access to applications that aren't trusted, so if we're using a whitelisting approach where any untrusted software isn't running, it's very hard for them to execute that. But if we take one step further and say, well, I don't want them hacking around in my registry and changing things that I might not know about, so I'm just literally going to block elevation. So if they try and elevate, and I'll try and run something that requires elevation, if I can type, it simply gets blocked here, and they can't do that. And we can always put pop-ups so they have the option to temporarily override it and things like that. In that case, I didn't. But just by taking these approaches, we really reduce the surface area of attack from not just known malware, but also unknown malware, and people just doing bad stuff and changing stuff on your system and that they shouldn't be. I did talk about administrator accounts here, and this is a sensitive topic because we have a lot of clients who are managed service providers, and managed service providers often deal with small businesses. And again, as an IT person, it frustrates me that I have to log in with a different account to make changes to my system. It frustrates me, but it doesn't change the fact I have to do it. When you're an MSP and you're talking to your client who's a small realtor who has 10 computers and he wants to be able to do whatever he wants and wants to be an administrator, what are your thoughts on that, Chase?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote about this too, is the keys to the kingdom is always a problem. You know, you've got administrators and developers. Typically, if you go through the sort of compromise life cycle and where these things go from bad to epic, it's usually not your regular end user that's the one with the keys to the kingdom. It's going to be an administrator. And there's a reason, like when I was red teaming, I always targeted administrators because I knew if I ever got one, then I had unfettered access to whatever I wanted. So you know, being able to make sure that your administrators are following procedures and aren't doing sort of rogue operations and have to engage in the same practices for your end users is a heck of a thing to put in place. And the other thing, to your point, right, is you should also be able to employ solutions where it's not hard for people to do their job. You know, I don't want 5 or 10 or 11 passwords to manage to get to stuff. I want to just log in, do my thing, approve stuff, and move on. So these types of solutions, when security becomes cumbersome, the first thing anybody wants to do is get around security. And in doing that, you negate the benefit of that solution. And I mean, having been an IT administrator for a secure cloud company, I can tell you, like, there was plenty of times where something would get in my way from doing my job, and I would think about how the hell do I get around this?
Yeah. Well, and that's it. We have pretty strict policies in-house with about saving passwords and where we're allowed to save them. We have password managers to help with common accounts, but then there's certain passwords that we're not allowed to save in the password manager, things like domain administrator passwords that potentially have too much data. And then all of those servers as well should always be treated with dual factor authentication. So if you do have servers, I mean, look, if you've got less than 10 IT staff, you can just go off and download Duo free of charge. There really is no excuse to not have dual factor authentication on your servers. And there's not just Duo, there's a whole bunch of other ones that won't even charge you for it. And if you've got more than 10 administrators, you can pay the 50, 60, $100 a month for whatever dual factor system you need. Because if you can hire 10 staff, more than 10 staff, you can probably afford that extra 50, $100. So we have a lot of procedures in-house. And I find it sometimes it's very frustrating. We had some busyness. We've been growing at extraordinary rates, and We added 11 servers in the last 2 weeks, which is great. But when you're adding servers at such a fast rate and you're constantly authenticating, it gets frustrating. As IT professionals, we have to say, wait there, let's not do anything stupid just because we want to save ourselves 5 seconds here. Because it's very easy to say, I'm just going to save that password. And then somebody compromises your machine, and then they've got access to all your servers, and it just gets worse from bad to worse.
I mean, if you look at what happened with the ransomware event that basically took down Maersk, that's exactly what happened. You know, it was one piece of software that somebody was pushing out, administrator creds got to where it was needed to go, proliferation from there using admin privileges. So it, and I mean, the folks that were there that caused the issue, they were just doing their job. And the one thing that they didn't have at the beginning of that infection that they should have had was multi-factor authentication and someone checking that this thing shouldn't do that thing.
So if one thing I'd like to add is if you're doing as a service provider, as an IT service provider, if you're providing backup services to your clients, and backup is obviously a hugely important part of security, make sure it's fine to use password managers. They're good. Just make sure you pick a good product, make sure it's secure, make sure you're happy, make sure you've got dual factor authentication on it. But in addition to that, maybe exclude a few things from there. Exclude your backup servers from your password managers. Make sure you don't leave saved credentials on your machine, because it might seem as though you're not stupid enough to get tricked by someone. You're not going to make a mistake. But one of the things I would have done when I was doing some of the pen testing or white hat or whatever you'd like to call it was I would target. It was always harder to target the smarter people. So of course it's harder to target administrators, but they're more valuable. But what you could do essentially is trick a front desk operator or an accountant or someone who's lower tech into opening something. You could run that under the user context. And that's really important. You don't need to be an administrator to run malware. You don't need to be an administrator to encrypt files or steal data. If you run something on your computer, if you run Angry Birds or Zoom, I mean, look at the crap Zoom's gone through over the last few weeks. That application has access to all of your data. It can steal everything that you own. It can copy that data. It can upload that data to the internet, and you don't need to elevate at all. Of course, if you can elevate and you can get more data, even better. So what I would have always done was I would target someone. The obvious way is getting them to run some kind of Word document, enable macros, download. It would download an executable payload, run that in the background, typically sign it, just so it's less likely to get picked up by an antivirus. And then, of course, if you're using whitelisting, that obviously helps you and stops that threat. But once you get that running, I would then I'd almost create like mini RMM system that I could send commands to. It would connect out to an API server every 30 seconds, and I would say, run this command prompt. And then what I could do from there is say, okay, well, I'm not going to trick the CEO. He seems to be pretty smart. He's not opening email attachments that have macros in them, and it's much harder to get on his machine. But what I would do is I'd say, okay, well, I'm going to copy this invoice onto the file share. And I'm going to find an executable spreadsheet, and I'm going to put that on the file share. So now the CEO doesn't think he's opening a suspicious email. He's just opening the same Excel spreadsheet he does every single day. He can then go in and open that. And it may not be called invoice. It may be staff vacation days or whatever looks like it's being accessed. And then suddenly what I would often see is a spurry of people opening that. And each time someone opens it, I now have another node running on another computer, checking in, sending me data, allowing me to run further commands on the system. Very, very easy to propagate. This is not going to get detected by any antivirus. So it's very easy to get around that. We do actually have a question here. Okay, so somebody's asked the question, are we providing any additional protections over what Zoom has recently updated? So I will say Zoom has fixed the bug, and I try not to beat up on software companies because of bugs, because it's part of the nature of software. The only things I'm unhappy about in Zoom's response to this is the urgency in which they said that the installation should be installed. Their first major security update, which we demonstrated, there's a video out on there on YouTube which shows you how you can use Zoom to exploit open PowerShell, run PowerShell on someone's machine, run malware on someone's machine. So we did that demonstration, and Zoom has fixed that now. I wish it said in the update, this is a critical security update. what ThreatLocker is doing in addition to that, well, what ThreatLocker did before that is the concept of ring fencing. I think every application you run shouldn't be able to access data it doesn't need to. So if you run Zoom, and I'll use this as an example here. So I'm just going to add my Zoom policy in here. Find that Zoom policy. Zoom does not need to access PowerShell. It does not need to access Redshift. It does not need to access Run DLL or schedule tasks or any of that. It has no legitimate business reason to do it. So if you can block it from interacting with those, you remove that surface area type. And you shouldn't wait for someone to say, oh, Zoom's got a bug. How do we fix it? How do we ring fence it? Ring fence everything as early as you can. It doesn't need to access my files, Zoom doesn't. So if I can block access to my files, it means if it is compromised, it can't get to my network shares, it can't get to my files. And the only internet site it really needs to go to is Zoom. So if you can ring fence your applications and you can define what they need to do, it means, and don't, like I said, don't wait for them to have a bug. Do it before they have a bug. Internet Explorer had a 0-day issue last year where you could run PowerShell commands on somebody's computer. We've had that ring fencing policy out there forever. The more you can ring fence, the better. If it doesn't need to access your file shares, just don't let it, because then if it's compromised, it doesn't matter. So in addition to what Zoom has done, which you should absolutely install the update, but ring fence as much as you can. If you use ThreatLocker, go into your application list and say, okay, what does Google Chrome really need to access? Does it need to read my network shares? And you may get this wrong, and you can always put these policies in monitor only mode to test them first and see what would get hit. But I could say, well, you know what? I think you should only be able to send PDF files from Google Chrome. Now, maybe I forget something. So if someone goes into here and just check, that's my top Google Chrome policy. Google Chrome ring fence, yeah. And someone tries to send a file out to a browser, or the browser gets compromised. If it can't access that data, of course, it can't encrypt it. So put as many in there as you can. And I can send PDFs, but if I try and send a text file, it just gets denied. And whether it's user intentional or accidental, it doesn't, or exploit, it doesn't matter. Chase, did you want to add anything to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that comes to mind, you know, post-COVID world, and now that everybody's outside the perimeter, really is, you know, you hear a lot of stuff about zero trust and that particular concept. And I mean, this is the implementation that you're trying to get to for people based on that approach of, you should do the things that you need to do for your purposes of your job, and that's what will allow you to do. And your applications and those things should do the purposes of application stuff that's needed to run that app. Other things shouldn't occur. So being able to say, Zoom, you can't, you know, run when DLLs, and Zoom, you can't get to my data, and those type of things, like that's what you're trying to do. And your other point that comes up very often when, you know, I've talked in the past is the ease of use. Like, you know, there's a common problem with managing all this when you have these really complex interfaces, and it's very, you know, it requires you to be almost an engineer for that one particular UI to do something. What we're trying to get to for folks that manage these systems is something like this, where, I mean, I've never administered ThreatLocker, but I could tell you from, you know, seeing you click through things, I could build and deploy a policy that would do what I was looking for pretty easily. So, you know, the folks will say, oh, well, there's not enough human capital in this space. Well, no, there's enough human capital if you have things in place that allow you to do the job at scale, and it's not exceptionally difficult to do your job.
And that's actually a good point. So when we created ThreatLocker, the idea is to bring someone, because if you worked for the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense have 100,000 computers that are pretty much exactly the same, they all run the same software, and you want to implement technologies like application whitelisting, the workload of that might be 5-10 people, and you can hire literally an army of people to do that for you. And if you need more people, you just raise taxes and hire more people. That's nice and fine and dandy. But in the real world, where the rest of us live, where we have to actually sell more stuff if we want more money, we have to we obviously have to use our resources. So when we created ThreatLocker, our initial mission statement was to take this default deny approach and make it easy. And one of the big challenges with default deny has always been cataloging what's there, and we've just made that a complete breeze. You deploy ThreatLocker, you wait within a couple of hours, you can literally come in here and say, oh, look at all the applications I'm running. And it will tell you everything you're running. It will catalog everything. It will catalog that 60,000 files that are running on your system. The next thing we do is, which obviously takes that huge workload away from you. And you can just go in then and cross-reference it with what you expected to see. Did I expect to see Firefox? Yes, no, delete it, don't delete it. The next thing we did is create this concept of what we call built-in applications. So instead of you having to, if you want to install new software that has 500 DLLs or 300 files or 1,000 files, you don't have to figure out what's required to run that. What you do is you use a threat locker built-in application. You just approve that application. It says, oh, here's Zoom. There's 22 files in Zoom. Let me permit all of those associated files. But also when Zoom updates, which literally seems to be every second day now, you don't have to worry about going back in and permitting that again. And that has always been what's put people off a default deny approach. They're scared, or what happens when there's an application update? I'm thinking, I mean, I'm just going to pull up a number here, and I actually don't know what it is. So I'll pull it up and be as shocked as you are when I get the number. Find my duo, so I'm going to pull up. You just let me in. I'm gonna query how many Windows updates. Patch Tuesday was yesterday. Microsoft released all their security updates on Patch Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. If you're going through a default deny approach, you have to be aware of that because there's a whole bunch of new files. I'm going to tell you how many unique files Microsoft released yesterday. Well, that's a big, that was a bigger number than I expected. 84,527 files Microsoft released as part of Windows updates yesterday across the 10 different versions of Windows 10 there is now. And the Windows Server and Windows, even Windows 7 actually had about 32 patches deployed yesterday, which even surprised us. So again, if you're the Department of Defense, that's fine. You just add those 84,000 files in, you've got a whole team of people to do it. But if you're in a small business, that's a real headache. So one of the things that Threat Locker does to really, the idea is to bring control, policy control, enterprise control down to the regular IT guy who doesn't have unlimited resources, the regular managed service provider, and say, we're going to take 99% of that work off you so you can just focus on, do I need to run new software? Yes. Do I want to approve it? Yes or no? And then that process itself, when somebody does try and download something, and whether it's a piece of malware or whether it's a real application, they just get a block message. You can override it. They hit request, you hit approve, and 30 seconds later, that application's running. So we really try and make that easy. The other thing I want to talk about was visibility, because without knowledge, we don't have anything. If we don't know what's running on our system, if we don't know who's accessing data and what programs are accessing data, we're unable to make decisions on what policy should be applied. And that's the reason when we create Threat Locker, the first thing we did was not block things, but to start to log every single executable that was running and say, show me everything that's being executed. If I can find my things keep moving around, execute, show me every DLL, every script file, every time an application goes out to the internet. Every time a user opens a document, did they copy it to a USB drive? Did they upload it with Chrome? Visibility is incredibly important to know what is there to begin with, whether something's permitted or denied. Knowing what's there allows you to make more educated decisions. I think you touched a little bit in your book about, I'm not sure of the title of it, about auditing and visibility on not just applications, but data. What are your thoughts around visibility in general and how people should approach what's running, what's happening in their environment?
Yeah, I think the space around visibility is super important, right? Because if we really get on the context of cyberspace as a battlefield environment, you wouldn't go into any battlefield and you wouldn't go running down the streets of downtown Mogadishu back in the 90s and expect for something bad not to happen to you if you couldn't see what was there and what was going on and be able to make decisions about where I should and shouldn't maneuver. So having visibility and understanding what's going on is super important. And the thing that most folks get wrapped up around when they think about visibility is they think about SIM. Well, without context and without understanding and without an ability to do something about the input that you get, you're just getting told that there's a problem. Like, would any of us logically go to a physician and the doctor says, you're sick, and then he turns around and leaves? You'd be like, whoa, hang on a second. Like, I want a treatment plan. Like, you want to go to a doctor that says, based on your symptoms, this is what the problem is. Here's the specific prognosis, and here's how we attack this issue. And that's what you're trying to get to, is input, context, understanding, and remediation. And if you can't do that, the visibility that you're getting can actually be more problematic than beneficial.
Somebody asked the question of, is ring fencing exclusive to ThreatLocker? Ring fencing is a term we coined about just short 2 years ago. The concept is relatively simple. It's every time something's running on your machine, it's potentially bad, it's potentially weaponizable. Application whitelisting, of course, stops anything from running in the first place. So the less that runs, the less that bad you have in there. But some programs we need to run. We need to run Zoom, we need to run Office, we need to run Google Chrome and legitimate applications. But what we want to do is make sure that when we run those applications, they have limited access to data. So the idea, the whole concept of ring fencing applications, so you can, what we call build fences around them, decide what can talk to what, is different to traditional sandboxing, where you say this application can talk to nothing, because that doesn't work, because it needs to talk to things. Guess what? QuickBooks needs to access the QuickBooks database, but it doesn't need to access my Office yet. So what we did, ThreatLocker came up with this concept of ring fencing to put controls in place. There are, of course, other control systems. Ours is very focused around the application and what the application can do, and that's why we call it ring fencing, because we ring fence the application. There are other ways you can apply controls, in that you can apply controls to user levels. The least users that have access to things on an NTFS permission obviously reduces your risk too. There's programs that will stop applications going out to the internet unless they're trusted. We like to refine it a little bit more than that, so we can say Zoom can go out to zoom.us and nowhere else, and that hardens our environment even further. You talked a lot in your book about the battlefield, and I've seen you speak a few times, Chase, about cyberspace being the battlefield, and you obviously bring a lot of experience from the real battlefield and real cyber battlefields into where cyberspace is. What is the outlook? I mean, this isn't a game anymore. We're not talking. I mean, we saw Florida write out millions and millions of dollars of checks last year to essentially foreign states. I mean, whether they're individuals sitting in the basement in Bitcoin, but these aren't just people, are they? These are governments. These are organized crime.
Yeah, I mean, this is now the only space in the world where in a country like North Korea that is, so poor and destitute that it can't feed its own people, can take on a global superpower and actually cause significant issues. Like, everyone is worried about nuclear weapons, and obviously that's important, but in reality, cyberspace levels the playing field. If your bad guys are as skilled and talented as mine, and we both have connectivity, there's a very real possibility that, things could escalate in that space. Now, I'm not talking about the cataclysmic end of days in cyberspace, but I'm saying that there's a reality in the space that the nation state actors, it's all even, it's all level. It's just a matter of time, effort, and capability. So they'll continue to push at that. And the bad thing for all of us is we're online, we're stuck in the middle of this battlefield. Our kids, our devices, our grandma, grandpa, like anyone that's touching or sending electrons is transiting between these nation states that are constantly going back and forth. There's no Geneva Convention for cyber. There is no, this is only DoD warfare domain. It is carte blanche across it for everybody to use all the time. And most of the time, those nation states are going to leverage the easy targets to get towards the bigger targets. You talked about small business. But nation state level actors, they don't, and I wrote about this in the book, they don't necessarily go after big time Lockheed Martins and Raytheons and DoD infrastructure, because they're hard to get to. They go after the third and fourth party mom and pop shop businesses that do business with those upstream providers. So they'll wait, they'll work their way in, and that's how they get there. And it's something to remind yourself about, I think, and remind everybody about is you're transiting a live fire battlefield environment, and it's somewhere that you have to be very aware of your surroundings, because things can go sideways really, really quickly.
Actually, and small businesses, when you think, well, small businesses aren't, the amount of small business owners I talk to and say, well, no one wants my data, I'm not that important.
They
Well,
probably don't. I think that's a fair point, right? They may not want your data. They're not after you. They're after your access and your connections and your further capabilities. And I do lots of workshops with execs all the time, and that's their argument is, well, what do they care about my company? It's like, well, they don't. They care about who you touch.
So I asked someone, a finance guy recently, a two-man company, who, let me ask you, I asked them outright, what would you pay if you lost all of your family photos, all of your business documents, every contract you've ever done? That data in public space might not be that valuable. It might be embarrassing, and maybe there's some embarrassing pictures or something you don't want seeing, but it's, yeah, no one's typically going to go after it and say, I want to steal this and I want to use it to, and maybe they'll blackmail you, but it's got to be something pretty juicy to launch a blackmail campaign. But I asked them what they would pay, and they said well into six figures. So if you're a two-man business and you're willing to pay well into six figures to get your data back, and that's what these attackers see. They don't see, oh, small local school or small local car dealership or small local mom and pop shop. They're seeing the business that's been built over 15, 20 years. What size check is this person going to write to get their business back? Because essentially that's what these guys are doing. They're taking the bit, and it's so easy in these small companies because they don't have the backup infrastructure, the resources, the tangible results that the bigger businesses do. They're at more risk at attack than anyone else. And it's they're willing to write $100, $200, $300,000 check. And that kind of leads me to the next point, and not to cross into a political line, but we see as a nation, we do not negotiate with terrorists. Unfortunately, we have soldiers taken in the battlefields, having their heads chopped off by terrorists in Afghanistan or in Iraq and the government line is very, very clear. Our position is we're not paying that amount. We're not releasing your friend from jail. We're not doing anything. Yet we've seen state after state, city after city, write huge checks to randomize people in Bitcoin that essentially are terrorists, because these guys aren't taking $2, $3, $5 million and building orphanages with them. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that is confounding, right? Because you're right. Like in the warfighting domain, you don't negotiate with terrorists. Like that is the policy. But when you're thinking about your data, the stuff that makes your business thrive, and attacks that come from noted nation states that will do things like ransomware, you're going to pay up. And there's the reality of that action is you encourage the behavior to continue. So, one thing that happened to me personally was I did some work for a state government. I found some stuff for them, and I actually sent them a note on, the likelihood of compromise coming their way. Their AG sent me a cease and desist letter and said, don't tell us, basically, because if we know about it, we may be liable for it if anything ever happens to us. Fast forward about 6 months later, they got destroyed with ransomware. And it was very hard for me not to go back and say, kind of nah, I told you so. And they wound up paying, like they wound up coughing up the money. And it's one of those deals where the state basically said at the time that I found what I found, that they're aware of it. It's an issue. We'll get to it when we get to it. When they got hit, all of a sudden, they were willing to pay out and negotiate real quick.
We see the same thing. I mean, working with local and federal government, that when you propose a security solution and they come back and there's obviously difficulty, and it's like, oh, we have to get this committee and this committee and this approved and this approved. And it takes months, and sometimes it doesn't get done, over a few $1,000s to put a security solution in there. Yet when we go back to those cities in Florida last year that got 2 of them in 1 month, and then there was 25 in Texas, and we watched the recording on the news station on going to their committee the very next day, saying we need to get approval for, one was $600,000, I think, to pay in Bitcoin to get our data back. And this committee, within 24 hours, managed to approve.
Yeah, it's amazing how that happens, right? All the bureaucracy goes away, like, oh, we can do this now.
There wasn't even one guy or one woman on that committee that said, no, I'm not paying it. Not one dispute. It was, okay, we're writing out this check for $600,000, which is not, in my mind, is not a good message, because what I saw there was a target painted on every city and every state in the US as, these people have checkbooks and they're willing to open them if we commit crimes.
Oh, if I had taken a different career path, I guess, and wanted to get rich quick, I mean, I'd be targeting state and local governments, because, you know, you might get 30 of them, and if 3 of them pay out, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, and these are small guys making lots of money very, very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that the one crew over in former Soviet Republic, where their door prize was a Ferrari for a party they were having.
And the thing is that the laws in those countries make it very difficult to actually prosecute them, so they can typically do whatever they like.
Yeah, and we're not going to extradite them. I mean, as long as they're not dumb enough to leave their country, which why would they when they're living in super nice houses and everything else? They're not going to get picked up by the U.S.
So, Chase, is there anything that you wanted to add? And by the way, I think we got 50 or 60 attendees here. If anyone has any questions, just general security questions, feel free to fire them off into the chat, the question, or you can raise your hand as well, and we can actually unmute you if you'd like as well. So feel free to ask questions. We're here to, of course, ThreatLocker is awesome, and everyone should try it out. It really is effective. But in addition to that, we're here to answer any other security questions you might have as well. But did you want to add anything, Chase?
Well, I mean, I really think that we're in a space where folks can't deny that the model that now makes the most sense is this approach towards security outside of the perimeter. You know, whether you call that zero trust, or like in my book, I call it edge and entity security, however you want to name it. The approach that makes the most sense now is to understand I have to stop what I can stop with policies that are deployable, that don't require megalith, and actually address the issue where the issue lies. And then I also have to take care of what's core to my business and my infrastructure, so that if things happen, because they will, I'll survive. You know, this is not perfection. Perfection is not achievable in this space. I tell people all the time, your strategy actually should be kind of what I have going on behind me. Like if I'm running from the zombie horde and you trip, I'm not picking you up. I'm not tying your shoes for you. That's all you're looking for in the strategy side of this. Is I want to be a harder target and faster from the zombie horde than you are. Because I'm okay with the bad guy just getting you. They'll go towards the lowest common denominator. So if you can adapt to some of that thinking and adapt to some of that approach, that there's realities in the space, there are controls that have to be implemented, and you should be focused on taking care of what will keep you alive on the far end of this. It makes a difference in the way that you approach the problem.
The other thing is, I mean, we talk a lot, the word zero trust gets bantered around. Somebody's asked the name of the book, so I'll just put that out there. And I'll actually put it into the chat window as well. So if all panelists and attendees, what I'll do even better is I'll put a link on Amazon. But the word zero trust gets bantered around, and in my mind, the idea with zero trust is not. We were at RSA a few months ago. Remember the days we went to trade shows,
Yeah.
and it was we spoke to quite a few vendors and quite a few people who are saying zero trust is we're zero trust. And I asked one company, how are you zero trust? We said, we don't trust any viruses. So, well, isn't that antivirus?
Okay, I mean, how do you argue with that? I guess sure, yeah.
And so the concept of true zero trust is, and it's not, the idea isn't to be a product as such, but it's not to replace an antivirus. And the concept of ThreatLocker is not to replace an antivirus. We are not a judge and a jury. We will give you guidance. We will tell you something is what it claims to be. So this is Microsoft Office, this is Zoom. We won't give you an opinion if you should run Zoom or you should run Dropbox or anything else. That's your business. But the idea is that we want to only start with a default deny, just like a firewall. I mean, and say, we're only going to allow what we need. How we build that, whether it's automated or manual, is another question. But the concept behind it is you block everything, and then nothing bad can run. And then when something is running, we assume it's going to be compromised, and we limit and we ring fence what it can do. That's at the application level, that's at the computer level. But it's also a practice we should take at the network level, at the perimeter level, where we still do have perimeters, which are essentially disappearing at this point, and at the employee level. Just because we hire people and they're nice guys and we like them, and that doesn't mean they need access to our servers. It doesn't mean they need access to our systems. It doesn't mean they need access to payroll, because if they don't have access, it means they can't go bad, they can't disappoint us, but also they can't make mistakes that ultimately cost us and damage our business. There was another question here. What does Threat Locker run on? A DC or something that is hosted with a client on each machine on the network? So Threat Locker runs on every endpoint on the network. It runs at the kernel level, which is incredibly key in security. You can't run at the user level in security. If you're blocking, if you're detecting, that's different. So we run at the kernel level. So when we look back at breaches like WannaCry or the Eternal Blue vulnerability or other vulnerabilities, we block those threats because we run at the kernel level. We do run on the domain controllers. We run on the file servers. We run on any server that you're running and any endpoint that you're running, laptops or desktops. It's a very small client. It takes 30 seconds to install. If you use SCCM or Active Directory, you can use group policy to push it out. If you're linking to Automate or N-Central or Kaseya, not only can you push it out through those agents, and we have predefined scripts, but you will automatically provision your clients, put the computers under the right group, and learn on a client-by-client basis. And you can have multi-tenancy with different clients with different policies, and then top-level policies as well. So it's very effective there. The Liz just posted, and I think Chase posted in the link to Chase's book. It really is. I don't get too much time to read or sleep or do anything as it stands. And on that note, I will actually kudos to all of the IT professionals out there at the moment, because we're going through a challenging time in the world, and IT is picking up a lot of the brunt on this. I've seen teacher appreciation days and mother appreciation days and doctor appreciation days and every type of appreciation day. But I think, the guys in the IT world right now, we're seeing it every single night. We have 24-hour support. We're getting 3 or 4 or 5 different chats with IT guys that are staying up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning to actually make sure that their clients are secured. Well, their clients are, because they don't have time, because their clients are migrating to home and getting them to configure Zoom and remote access and remote desktop policies. So kudos to all of those IT guys that are actually on the front line of the cybersecurity war right now, and working really hard to make sure, despite the fact that they're super busy and underappreciated, that their clients are actually secured and their users are actually secured and taking it seriously. I have this is a great book. Like I said, I don't get much time to read, but I did spend the time reading it. It's very, very clear cut. There's no mumbo jumbo in there. It's not about compliance. It's about tangible things we should be doing and how we should be securing our environments. If you do get a chance, it's, I don't know, I can't remember the cost, but it wasn't expensive. You can get it on Kindle or paperback. It's worth getting it from Amazon.
Thanks, Danny. Appreciate that. Yeah, I agree. I think we should have a World Admin Day, right?
Yeah, just everyone should take a day off, and then the world will end. And then the power grids will go out. So, and everything else will go wrong, but yeah. So if you do get time, though, take time to read it. So somebody's asked the question, does Threat Locker need a reboot after deploying? No, it doesn't need a reboot. I don't even think it needs a reboot on Windows XP, although hopefully you don't have too many XP devices out there now. But you can push it out, you can register the driver on the fly. The only thing that doesn't register is the pop-up when something gets blocked. The actual tray app, and that happens when the user logs out and logs in. You can manually start it, but it runs under the user context, so it happens on login. But it can be done, the actual blocking and the auditing can be done within a few minutes. We actually had a client deploy 2,000 seats at the end of a demo and let it learn for a week, came back, pulled their hair out over the amount of crap that was installed on their computers and coupon clippers and garbageware and all that sort of stuff, denied a bunch of stuff in the list, and then turned it on.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, guys, I don't think we have any other questions. If you do get a chance, book a full demo of Threat Locker. You can either watch a pre-recorded one on our website, or just I'm going to throw in the calendar link as well here. I can make sure I've got the right one into the chat here. So if you want. I'm going to throw that in there. So feel free to book a demo with one of our engineers. Feel free to sign up for a trial. It really is worth taking a look at. Chase, I appreciate you staying by today. We will be publishing this recording online afterwards. So if you do want to share it with anyone, if there's anyone who wants, your team wants to view it, feel free to do so.
Great talking to you, Danny.
Thank you, Chase.